The next step is we want to start adding our portfolio companies now that we've added our fund. On the dashboard, you can see in the onboarding, it says step 2 of 7 is to add portfolio company. So I can quick jump to create one there, but I can also just navigate to portfolio companies page over here, or even do it directly from within the fund that I created before and create it here. But I'm going to do it from here, the portfolio page. And as per usual, there's a couple of ways of doing it. We can do an import from Excel file, or we can manually add a new company. Now, before I do that, I also want to run through a couple of things. So first of all is, for most funds, they're just going to be investing in portfolio companies, which is, as you can see over here, the default position. But we also wanted to allow for other funds who also invest in funds themselves, i.e. fund of funds. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you're a fund investing in another fund, you can always just add that investment here. You'll see portfolio funds, and you'll see a new fund option here. I know that can be a little bit confusing because we're setting up our own fund vehicles earlier, but this is your vehicle that you're investing from, that you have investors in, and this is what you're investing in too, which is typically companies, but can be funds as well. That's the difference. But for now, I'm going to assume that you only invest in portfolio companies. Some other key things here are, later on when we add companies, you better filter it by which fund those companies sit in. Also by period, which will impact what's shown in terms of how much you've invested, what the current valuation is, etc. And we'll get to this a little bit later. But if you do want to add in some different scenarios around valuation returns, we can add those in. But for most people, you just leave it as base case. Anyway, let's get started and add our first portfolio company. So I'm going to click up here and click new company. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a logo because we all like to see a nice logo here. So I'm going to give it a cloud logo for this company. Now, what they've invested in is a pest control company. So I'm going to give it that name. That's the name of the company, not description. Maybe we call it NVIDIA. We'll call it NVIDIA because everyone knows that company. Now, the next one is what type of investment it is. So, it's defaulted to portfolio company, which we discussed earlier, but we can actually switch that to portfolio fund here if we like, but we're just going to leave that as is. The next is which fund is investing in this company. Now, you might say, well, what if we've got two different funds investing in the same company? Well, we can actually take that into account later on when we get to transactions, but I guess for most people, it's, one company, one fund. And even if not, typically it's what's the first fund you're setting it up for, etc. Not the end of the world. As I said, if you do have multi-funds investing in the same fund, we can cross that bridge later. But for now, we're just going to put it in the fund that we've set up here. Status is whether it's a current company, whether it's exited, a future company, or other options. So I think for most people, it's just going to be active, but later on, if you are setting up companies that you've historically invested in that you've now exited, you could put them at that status, for example. Sector is optional, but look, the more information you put in here, the better, because it means but later on when we get to analytics, we can run it in multiple different ways. So NVIDIA, we're going to put it as a hardware company. And then investment stage is also optional, but I'm going to put this as growth capital. Multiple different ways you can do this. Website, we're going to put it as nvidia.com. Headquarters, I don't actually know where they're based. Let's go San Francisco. And this is up to you whether you want to do this just by state, by city, whatever you like, but just make it consistent across your companies, which method you choose, because it is just a text field. Founded year, I don't know, let's go 1990. Board seats, 2. Now, you might be asking, well, what if I want different fields? Okay, well, you can just leave some of these blank. And what you can do is you can actually add in your own custom fields down here. You can see I've already added in a couple myself, but what we can do is I can click here, manage fields. I can delete any of these. I can add my own custom field like CEO name, strategy, board seats. So I can go CEO name, or I can go division, whatever it is. You can choose text field, URL, number. This is depending on what we're allowing people to enter it in. We can choose whether it's a required field, like a mandatory field to be filled in, and a default value, like what appears if no one's filled it in. So I've already got a couple of examples there: CEO name, risk, state, and a test field. But these are, you don't have to use these, you don't have to use them, but that capacity is there to set it up. Okay, cool. So I've filled out all the details. I'm going to create this company now, including filling out some custom fields down here just to show you what that would look like. And now you can see we've created our company, which is also accessible by going back to our portfolio tab. You'll notice if I switch to funds, it disappears because that's just for funds, portfolio funds we've invested in. But our list of companies is here. You can see we haven't got any data for investments yet, and therefore we haven't got any returns data. But if I click on our company here, I can see the qualitative information we filled in. We can see any transactions we've added for this company, which we haven't done yet. That'll be in the transactions module. Cap table, if we want to add that in. Okay, so we can facilitate cap table. So let's quickly talk about that as well. So in terms of adding a cap table, again, we can import from Excel. We can manually add an entry. So first of all, we can type the shareholder's name, and you'll notice we've got a funds button over here. This is if the shareholder you're typing is the fund you're adding. So you can see by clicking over there, I can choose from our funds that we've set up. So I'll go fund one. And that just means that we know how much the fund owns in this company. So we can do calculations based off whatever number this is. Whereas if you just typed in a name, we wouldn't really know if it's a fund or a similar named entity. So in this case, I'm adding the fund, shareholder type fund that's been pre-filled. So let's say the fund owns 1,000 shares. And let's say the date of investment was 30/06/2025. Class of shares will go common, and these are all optional fields. So I'm just going to add that in. You can see I've now got 1,000 shares. So how this cap table works is it says, well, there's 1,000 shares issued to this person, and there's also 1,000 shares in total. Therefore, they own 100%. But what if we had another line, which was the founder's name? I'm going to call him Joe Blow. He's an individual, and he's got 9,000 shares. So logically, if this is working, then the fund would own 10% of this company, right? So you can see 1,000 shares, 9,000. Therefore, the fund has 10%, and we know that that's the fund, so we can put that in our reports, etc. later on. And we know the founder's got 90%. But of course, most cap tables are quite long, so if you do want to use this feature, you can just import it from Excel, download the template, fill it in, upload it. Pretty simple. You can bulk upload your cap tables very quickly. The next one is update. So this is more around any qualitative updates around your company. So for example, general update, but it could also be fundraising, new products, new team changes, new customers, etc. You can put in these updates so anyone looking at these reports can see them. So for example, we could do a funding update. So closed Series A funding round. Investors include Microsoft. You can add that update in. You can see that's now been updated at there, and it's categorized as fundraising. But a really cool feature is an AI upload. So what you can do is you can actually drag and drop an investor document, report, anything really. Choose it, upload the file, and it'll use AI to scan it and extract key information and put that in a summary for you. So you don't need to manually type these up. That's another cool feature. Valuations, that'll just link to any data you've uploaded already in valuations, which we haven't done yet. Same for metrics for the metrics module. And then finally, we've got documents. So documents are things like, investment documents, subscription agreements, things like that. Anything you want to store in here connected to this particular company. And that's pretty much it for companies. Yeah, I think we can probably move on to the next step, which is adding our first transaction, which is our first investment into a company.